especially in those nuanced spaces where you think, oh, I'm up here, but you walk into a different space, well, or there, and you're like, and it's this delicate dance of, I think, humility and love and all of that in between, because you learn about thyself, you know what I mean? Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes you feel like you're at the top shelf, and then you get moved, and you're like, oh gosh.
Oh, speak on it.
Right there, it would have been a nice time for the drop. Right here.
We can do this here, watch me rock the flow. Killing it a must, never option, no.
Spent guys at the crab table, still ain't signed to a rap label. DVD when I ain't have cable. I got balls, he ain't rap able. A 6D for me is man fatal. Can't see me like a bad angle.
Absolutely, ain't going nowhere. We will be forever, and ever and ever.
Peace, beautiful family. This is Dr. Walter Hidalgo, and this is the Know That Shelf Show. The Know That Shelf Show utilizes the metaphor of the shelf in order to extrapolate the self. And the way we do that is we invite guests to come in and share something about them shelves. And before I introduce my guest, oh boy, this is not a backdrop. We are outside. You know, young people say we outside. We really outside today. So I want to start off with www.knowthatshelf.tv. That's where you can find information about my book, Beyond the Four Walls, The Rise of Ministry and Spirituality of Hip Hop, information on coaching, workshops, and including a lot of similar things that my guest does also, but we'll talk about that later. In addition to that, I want to give a big shout out, as we always do, to a group of individuals. And today, I want to give a big shout out to all the women out there and all of its spectrum. To all the ladies, right? I want to give a big shout out to all the people who go overseas and do God's work, however way that looks like, because I think that's pretty amazing. I want to give a big shout out to all my educators, all my laity that work in some type of faith. But as you know, Father Hugo once told me, you don't need to wear the collar to do God's work. Ooh, God, that changed me forever, because here's somebody with me that I respect, that I admire. I'm humbled. I'm grateful. My sister from another Karen.
I'll take
Awkward. Welcome.
Thanks, Walter.
Thank you so much for being here. In the midst of, as we transition, getting closer to the winter solstice, and she's here.
Creeping in.
Yeah,
I feel it.
Great. We are outside, as the young people say. But as I always do when I have guests, I like to contextualize things. So if we were to jump into a time machine like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures,
Which I know about from listening to your show.
yes, she's a listener. We have a listener. And go back in time to a younger Karen. What would we see? What would we smell? What would we hear? Because you're originally from? Oregon. We are here, West Coast. Talk to us about that, Karen.
West Coast.
Ooh.
So I grew up in Oregon.
Yeah.
I'm one of 5 kids. So I think when I think of younger me, I think of that unit. Like my brain thinks about a we.
Yeah.
Because I grew up with 4 siblings and we were very close. We were homeschooled, which I think probably led to a lot of the way that I evolved.
Interesting.
I had a dad who worked to make sure we had everything we need, and a mom who took care of us and homeschooled us, and they sort of divided up the subjects. But I was with my siblings all day, every day, and we'd get together with other families and do things, but they were and still are my go-to, my people.
You know, that's so interesting. I didn't know that about
Yeah.
you. We're going to learn so much.
I
I
always
love
tell people
it.
it's why I can spell so well, which is not true.
Yeah.
Break those stereotypes.
I think it's fascinating because, I was homeschooling my daughter, and I think that really exacerbated when COVID hit, and a lot of people transitioned to homeschooling and online schooling. And what are your thoughts on, I guess, education as a whole, as someone who's been taught at home?
Oh man, I know what you got.
I know we got, exactly.
I mean, I think the upbringing I had was a very privileged one in the sense that my family had the ability to make those decisions, to have a parent that was at home, had a parent who could make enough to support a big family unit by today's standards. For me, it was great because it was sort of like pick your own adventure in some ways. Like I remember when I didn't go through formal middle school. I went to public high school, but that was I went to kindergarten and first grade in public school, and then I was homeschooled and went back in high school. And middle school in particular, I feel like for me was great to get to skip that in a building, everybody together. You know, there's just a lot flying around in middle school.
Right.
And my mom, for 7th grade, I remember said, well, what do you want to study? Or maybe it was 8th grade. And so I wanted to do like women's history, personal finance, because I was a weird kid and that was interesting. So like one of my courses was personal finance, and they got like the Idiot's Guide to Personal Finance, and I worked through that, and my dad would talk to me about different sections and then came up with activities. And for me, that was great. I think it was hard on my parents at times because my older sister was the one that would sit down and, you know, she would just knock out whatever she had to do. And I was the kid who was like reading upside down with my feet in the air on the couch, or you know, Walkman on. You asked what would we hear, the Walkman would have been on. Flipping my cassette tapes.
Oh, the cassettes, bringing it back. Gee golly, you're aging
How old
yourself.
I am.
No, that's, you know, it's fascinating because especially on the finance thing, I'm a huge advocate with financing. It's very interesting that I brought that up because now with social media, we're starting to see a lot of young people who are, through their experiences of doing entrepreneurship online, whether it's selling something, renting cars with Turo and Airbnb and all these things, which I'm a big advocate of, but they're learning these skills that they said it would have been better and much easier had I had that education foundation, especially I think in high school, where I think they should start there, not as a decision when you go to like undergrad. Yeah.
I mean, like I said, we could talk for ages about opinions on education, and I think, I mean, you're shouting people out. Shout out to anyone who's working in the education field.
Word,
right
now,
it's
not.
It is hard.
It is,
And you know, the standards, the expectations that we're putting on young people, the go mentality, the always having to do better. I have a son who I have 2 sons I gained through marriage, and one is sort of in the college application process. My gosh.
Oh, gee, God.
That is, you know, the expectations that they have on folks coming out of high school. Whereas I'm like all about like mindfulness. How do we teach people just to be? Because I lived through that. Perfectionistic. I always tell people I'm a recovering perfectionist, and some days are better than others. What do we put on people? And then we wonder why we've got so many mental health challenges. The capitalism, the isolation, you know, all the stuff.
We were just talking about the service that you do mentoring and coaching of kids. Tell us about that.
So the coaching piece, as somebody that has been coached, I wanted to give back and coach. I've been coaching for like 20 years. I work with an organization called the Elite Method, where we provide in-house coaching to young people between the ages of 4 and 14. It's like Big Brother meets a private coach. So we like to integrate social emotional development with physical skills.
You help build up their confidence, help them find some things they're good at.
I'm not trying to knock on social media, but we are in the digital age, man. You know, bullying, all-time high. Suicide, all-time high. You know what I'm saying? Everybody want to compare to each other instead of empowering. I'm coming at a young person like, yo, I see you because you're a reflection of the divine. So I'm going to treat you as such. Yeah, I want to, because you said, whoa, you said a lot. But I really want to narrow in, I guess, sort of, you gave me the alley-oop with this because I think this is so important. But I think one of the things that you and I, one of the ways we connected was through Marino. Shout out to the Marino fathers and brothers, right?
And the lay missioners.
And the lay missioners and the sisters,
all.
the Marino Office of Global Concerns, and every single person that I had the honor of working with. I'm grateful, shout out. But nothing is perfect, especially when it's in the hands of human beings, which are fragile,
Yep.
right? But I want to talk, because you said mindfulness, right?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, where was your mentality at that gave you the decision to go to Marino, like to do lay missionary work, right? Where was your mind at? First of all, explain to people what that is,
Yep.
and how has that impacted you and the trajectory of your life?
Yeah. So what Walter is alluding to is
Yes.
I spent 3.5 years living and working in Cambodia with the Marino Lay
Yes.
missionaries
Yep.
a while ago now. Orientation was over 10 years ago.
Wow.
So-
Anniversary. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So I came to that decision, went through high school, went through college. I was like the service kid.
Yeah.
That was my reputation, because I
Yeah.
just loved opportunities that I could interact with people and feel like I was doing something useful.
I
and
know the
so-
feeling.
Just begged hours after hours in high school.
Wow.
That was what I did. I wasn't in the band, I wasn't in a sport, I was just doing volunteer projects
Sure.
and organizing them. So that sort of led into college, which I was around a lot of people who did post-grad service or had done post-grad service, were doing service in college, was shaped by that, was shaped by, what advocacy could really look like as well, and
Right.
activism and
Yeah.
those sorts of things. And that put me on a trajectory to do a post-grad service program right after college. Spent a few years working and was like missing that. The way that for me post-grad service was, it was community. It was the way that like my faith and being in community with other people and learning from people all came together. And my experience of a lot of U.S. society, the pieces that I grew up in, it's all separate. It was, here's your faith piece, here's your, maybe you do the service piece, maybe you have a community. But when I was in that post-grad service world, it was all interconnected.
Together. Yeah.
Which to me is how the world should work.
Yeah.
And I think how the world used to work.
Right.
And so after about 3 years from the post-grad service program, I was like, I missed that. And there were ways that I had tried to build it in my own life independently, but was looking for something that would allow for that again. And I also was aware that I'm pretty good at like crisis logistics.
Oh,
I'm
interesting.
that person, like when things are falling apart, friends will call and be like, this is going on, like help me get through it.
Yeah.
I've heard, some people, they say you have like your firefighter friend and you have your
Yeah.
your
team, your dream team.
spiritual
Yeah.
friend, and you have these
Yes.
things. And I was just always sort of the firefighter friend.
Sure.
I can zoom in, I can sort things out, I can, stifle what I need
Right,
to stifle
right.
long enough to get through. And so I had an interest in doing that more on like a global scale, especially around like global emergencies and things like that. And so I was interested in that field. To get into that field, you have to have experience working overseas. And so Marino was an opportunity to sort of combine that desire for community, faith, service all together, and the resume factor. It's the world
Of course.
we live in.
Yeah.
So I applied to Marino. The way it worked at that point was you sort of said, of the countries I served in, where might you want to go, based on your skill sets and the needs that
Right.
they'd identified for the communities. I wound up getting the call to go to Cambodia and was there for 3.5 years. So
Oh, we outside for real.
no special effects.
Yeah.
Just Mother Nature.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but you asked the other part of your question, other than contextualizing that, was how that impacted me. And I think about sort of the people I carry with me everywhere I go. And some of them I've met, some of them I've heard speak, some of them I've read what they've written. And the folks that I got to work alongside in Cambodia, I think, transformed me in a lot of different ways. I worked with the Cambodian deaf community, and so recognizing I had known some folks that were members of the deaf community here in the U.S. prior to going, and so had some interaction, but to sort of live and work in that community for about 3 years, it really made me look at a lot of things differently. Like, prior to that, I wouldn't have identified myself as hearing. Like, when people say, well, what are your identities? Because, again, when you live in all privileged identities, you just get to take them for granted.
Speak on it, yeah.
So, you know, identifying that I have hearing privilege, and also identifying the ways that, like, the deaf community is a sub-community, is a sub-language group, it is a sub-culture. What I learned from many wise teachers in the deaf community was, you know, to try to take the ableism out of it, that, you know, someone is disabled in that community. No, they're deaf. They use a different language. They have an amazing culture. And the Cambodian deaf community in particular welcomed me in a way that just, you know, it made me feel like I had a home in a community while I was an outsider in so many ways in this country. And so I recognize many different ways that, you know, was one little way that it impacted me, but also just that idea of community and that idea of being present to people, and the idea of recognizing the skills and the gifts and the humanity in people, even when they don't fit into sort of what I would say is like our white supremacist expectations of what is the one right way to do things, and how people should show up in the world, and how we're trying to get everybody to this, you know, whatever. And so that, I think, is also just a piece of it that continues to play with me.
And I think that you hit one point that we worked on, you and I, and with others, the idea of privilege. That we all have privilege in all different, in a spectrum. There's a spectrum of privilege, yo. Whether it's your sexuality, your religion, your gender, your education, your ethnicity, your layer, your economic status, your zip code. You know, and it's so interesting how we have to operate, especially in those nuanced spaces where you think, oh, I'm up here, but you walk into a different space, well, or there, and you're like, and it's this delicate dance of, I think, humility and love and all of that in between, because you learn about thyself, you know what I mean? Exactly.
Sometimes you feel like you're at the top shelf, and then you get moved, and you're like, oh gosh.
Speak on it, exactly. You just got put into the lower shelf. Wow. And, you know, it's really interesting with Cambodia, totally different, you know, the other side of the world, literally. You know? What's one thing that you learned about Cambodia that you didn't know when you got there?
I mean,
I'm sure many.
I didn't know a lot about Cambodia when I got there. That's a hard question. Because I guess when I think about Cambodia, I think about the people. And you know, I would never say all Cambodians are the same. Sure. I mean, it's a country, it's about the size of Missouri, so it's pretty small compared to the U.S. But just like the range of experiences, even having friends who didn't work with the deaf community that were hearing versus my deaf Cambodian friends, and just getting to learn from their different lived experiences as they would generously share with me. I mean, what's one thing that I learned? I don't do ones, Walter. I mean, the history, what Cambodia has been through the genocide.
We talked about the killing fields, you know. Godly, what a history.
Someone had told me that, who works in mental health, that it's one of the countries that third generation PTSD, like one of the first places where that was found.
Even like with post-traumatic like slave disorder and these things that are the studies neurologically that are coming out.
So that's just, you know, in my mind, coming from an upbringing that I had so much privilege, and yes, we all carry trauma in different ways. But recognizing the extra burdens that so many of my colleagues just generationally had passed down. That I would never fully understand. I can try to, I can listen, I can try, but it's not my experience. So I think that was one of the things I most enjoyed being there, because I worked doing communications, and so it gave me a lot of ability to do things sort of like this, where it was figuring out how to help provide a platform. I always tell people one of my biggest jobs there, one was being a cheerleader, because colonialism and racism and all of these things get so entrenched that sometimes it was just like holding other people back so that my deaf colleague could speak, or watching how when I was the interpreter, sometimes people wouldn't understand how interpreters would work. So my deaf colleague would be speaking, they'd be signing, and I would be interpreting for them. And people would pay more attention when I was the one interpreting because I was a white foreign woman versus if it was one of my Cambodian colleagues who was an interpreter. And so seeing the weight that my deaf Cambodian colleagues would be given, some people would listen more because the words were coming out of their hands, but they were coming out of my mouth. And since the other person was hearing and couldn't understand sign language, and sort of wrestling with that tension, like being like, this is them speaking.
Yeah.
Like I am simply here to make sure you, as the hearing person, understand them.
Yes.
And I think that's, that was another one of the pieces that really transformed me is how can I use the privilege I carry in whatever space I go to stand in doorways and to say, I'm just going to stand here while they talk.
Yeah.
I'm just going to put my hand over your mouth, person who has too much privilege that they're throwing around, so that you listen to this person that you're choosing to ignore. Yeah.
So I want to transition because what we do when we invite guests is we invite them to share something from their shelf. What do you have for us? I am so curious right now.
Let me take the gloves off. Okay, so what I brought is all nicely packaged in this great little box. This is a candle holder that I was given by a friend a long time ago. And the reason that I brought that in particular was, so now I work independently. Go for it. And the work that I am striving to do is around creating spaces, because from all of these experiences I've had that made me who I am, I've seen so many people, and myself included, have gone through burnouts or burned myself up by, trying to do too much and not taking care of myself, or, recognizing how colleagues and friends who have identities that have been marginalized are carrying all of that and doing phenomenal work while still trying to carry all of that and not having spaces to sustain, and recognizing how there's so many structures in our world that, in my opinion, need to be torn down, rethought, done away with. And as much as I would like us to be able to snap our fingers and to have a world that looks different, it's a marathon. It's I've heard it's a relay race, you're passing it off. So trying to figure out how do we create those spaces that we can come for community care, for self-care, for mindfulness. I've been doing like a Mindfulness Monday thing every week, so people can just call in and we do different mindfulness activity each week, because sometimes an art thing works for you and then something happens and that's not going to work anymore, and sometimes silence meditation works and then the next week something has happened and silence is not a safe place anymore. And so trying to just introduce different techniques, using my restorative justice background, which is also in the circle, but just this idea of like, we gotta hold each other up.
Yeah.
And we have to recognize the structures and the institutions and things that are weighing some people down more than others. And so how do we hold each other up? How do we tear those down? How do we stand alongside one another? Instead of this idea of speaking for somebody else, or whatever some of the from my perspective, old ways of doing things were.
Right.
So that was why this sort of jumped out when you asked to bring something.
Yeah, no, and I think it speaks to the work that you and I did in Marino, and all the side conversations, even this one we're having now, because I think it's so important in a world that is so rapidly changing. Like you mentioned the cassettes, and then we had the CDs, and then we had the MP3s, and now like I don't even know where to put a CD player anymore. I don't even and it's weird, and it's great, but it could be a little overwhelming. And I think this is circling back to what you said earlier about mindfulness, about creating these spaces where, you know, the workspace place is changing. The gig economy is really interesting now. People working from home. We talked about homeschooling. So the world is, you know, in a post-COVID world, whatever that means, and wars everywhere right now, and isolation is just depression, and God, the violence that we're dealing with, the gun violence. What is one sort of just practical technique? I think you threw a lot already, just to help people to slow down, that they can just do on their own.
Just one. So my favorite one recently that I've been doing a lot is shaking. So if you think about, like, I always talk about my dogs. I love my dogs. When my dogs like see a squirrel or they get really wound up, afterwards they do that thing where they just shake their whole body.
Yeah.
And what I have read and heard is that all mammals have that instinct. So as humans, we have this instinct
Deep.
too.
Yes.
And if you think about
Yes.
like when you get that adrenaline rush, it just sticks in your body.
Right.
And so it's the idea of you can just shake, whether it's your hands, whether it's your whole body, whether it's like jumping up and down, to just try to move some of that
Yes.
through. I mean, for me, it's been helpful in like incredibly stressful situations where I will walk out of a room and I will literally jump up and down and sort of shake,
Yes.
just so I can get the nervous system calmed down
Yes.
enough that I can re-engage in a conversation.
Yeah.
And so
Yes, and
yeah.
I'm loving what you're saying, because, you know, I home coach kids, I told you, and what I consistently always do after we stretch and before we get it in, shake your feet. And then, and sometimes I tell them to spin, and I'm like, are you noticing something happening in your body? Yeah, the blood is flowing. I was like, yeah, to allow your blood to flow, you know. And I think the spaces of mindfulness is really just allowing blood to flow, like physiologically, spiritually, and all that stuff. And to notice it, be present on it. Somewhere out in this world, there is a little Karen in the making. I don't know if she's going to be a missioner. I don't know if she's going to be what kind of line of work, but maybe doing what you're doing.
As long as she's not a Karen.
Yeah, be you, right? But what's one, you know me and with the young people, what's one piece of advice you would give to a young person who's trying to follow your path, Karen?
I mean, I wouldn't even say following my path. I would say the advice that I give to a young person and that I tell my 17-year-old is that it is okay to just be.
Yeah.
Like,
be.
You are worthy and you are enough without having to produce. It's capitalism that tells us that your worth is based on your grades or your accomplishments or your gold stars or your sticker chart.
Yeah.
It just being is okay sometimes.
Yeah. You know, it's so crazy. I love that. Got me a little emotional with that one, because I always tell, like, I tell my daughter, like, you know, I'm proud of you. And she goes, why, Dad? I didn't do nothing. And I go, just because of who you are, you know, just because you exist in this world. And it's like a shock factor. And I guess I'm saying that too because I look at you and I tell everybody, I'm just so proud of you. You know, like the person you've become. Because it's hard out here, man. There's a lot of stuff happening in the world. And I see like God's light in you and the person that you are, how you dedicate yourself. And I always tell people that I invite here, like I look at them, I'm like, I'm everything you are and nothing that you are, and it's beautiful. And that's the way God created us. If people want to reach out to you, Karen, to get your services, you know, because you out here hustling, you're doing the workshops, we've had so many conversations, where can people connect with you?
So the easiest way is probably wishyouKnew.net.
Okay.
Which is that's where the mindfulness is. Starting to host rage circles, so if you've just got some rage you need to let out, 2 hours online, come and just be present to it. At the end of the day, that's what I hope this next sort of phase of my life is how to create spaces where we can just be present.
Yeah.
And every Mindfulness Monday, we start with the question of, how are you? And without judgment, without rationalizing, without saying, like, you know, life flipping sucks right now.
And that's
but
okay.
it's going to be okay. No buts. Just, you know, I am in pain. Period. Full stop.
Yes.
So, yeah, wishing you done that. My greatest joy, which you know, is like getting to know people and figuring out like what is that space. I don't say that I have like one specific space that it's hire me to do this one thing, because that's not how I roll.
Word, yeah, we spread out, like we do it. Yes,
let's talk and let's see, like, if it's a space you're looking for. Let's see if it's a space that I would be able to co-create with you, and if it's not, it's not.
I love it. As we always do, to end the Know Thyself show, we end with a quote. And this one comes to us from Mark Twain. Okay. And it reads as such. The two most important days in life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. Peace, family. Oh.
Mixtape.